Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this session on public engagement. My name is Marianneke Vijgen. I'm assistant professor at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development in Utrecht University, the Netherlands. And I'm work package leader of Torch Public Engagement. And together with Anissa Trianti, we've done, and some other work package leads in the different universities of CHARMU, we have done research on the incentives and disincentives for public engagement and transdisciplinary research and education. So we would like to very much share some of our findings and also some of the recommendations of that work package. And as well, of course, we have some speakers from outside of CHARMU. So we have Truls Jacobsen from the University of Stavanger, Norway, Director of Innovation, and also part of the ECIU, the European Consortium of Innovative Universities. Then we have Thomas Berkman, Associate Professor of Legal Philosophy, Faculty of Law at the Vytautas Mangas University in Lithuania, and also part of T4Europe. And then Kate Morris, Head of Campus Engage of Irish Universities Association on behalf of 7 universities in Ireland. So maybe if we can, if you want to add to this, any additions to that, any of the speakers?
We'll come back to that.
Yes, maybe you can introduce yourself once you start the presentation and also give some background of your work. And as well, I'd be also very interested in the T4Europe and the ECIU as other European University alliances. So the program of today is, well, first we have a presentation by Anissa Trianti, presenting the findings from the work package on Torch on the incentives and disincentives for public engagement and transdisciplinary science and education. And then we have Truls Jacobsen, Thomas Berkman, and Kate Morris with their presentations on their experiences. And then we will have some panel discussion and Q&A from the audience, a more kind of interactive part where we have a couple of questions that we identified beforehand, but we very much welcome, of course, your inputs and questions and insights. So let's start with Anissa, and maybe you can also introduce yourself first and explain the work.
Thanks so much, Marianneke. I hope that you can see my slides now, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, my name is Anissa Trianti. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University, the same department with Marianneke, environmental governance. And I'm working together with Marianneke as the work package lead of public engagement, and also other colleagues from 5 different universities. I put their names also here. And we've been working together for more than a year to come with some findings that we wanted to present to you today. Yeah, and we hope to also get your input and also feedback from this work, because we're still trying to finalize the outcomes, the reports. And after this, we will try to also incorporate your comments and feedback into our final reports. Let me check, how can I move to the next slide? Okay, so I will try to present to you the objective of our work and also concept that we are using for our work, the actions and deliverables, some main results, not all of them because we don't have enough time, but we will try to highlight some of the main examples and results, and also reflections from the findings, and recommendation on how to move forward with public engagement and transdisciplinary science. And we will end with some discussion points that might trigger more input from you. Right, so the objective of our work is to collect and share existing modalities and practices, both for stimulating co-creation of challenge-driven research and innovation with societal stakeholders, but also on how to balance between monodisciplinary excellence-driven research and global challenge-driven transdisciplinary research and innovation. And the concept that we are using are varied, but these two concepts are quite core to our work. The first one is public engagement. We see public engagement as ways to disseminate and also communicate research with the public, and also trying to incorporate their engagement in science. And the transdisciplinary science concept here means that we would also like to integrate the knowledge across different societal actors, not only academic actors, but also extra academic actors to address societal challenges. And what we mean here by science is both research and education, but also interplays between them. And I think the strength of our work is that we are trying, of course, these two concepts are the initial concept that we are trying to operationalize, but in the end, the findings show different type of interpretation from different universities, but also the way it manifested to different initiatives, the structure and policies, and also way forward. Summary of the objective and the findings. So to achieve the objective one, we are actually trying to produce the first report, which shows findings on how to stimulate co-creation of challenge-driven R&I. And we built these findings from our analysis on structure and policies, incentives and disincentives on public engagement and transdisciplinary science at 4 levels, so individual and also team level, university, societal stakeholders, and also systemic level. Here includes also national and regional level. And then we come up with some of the best practices and also retrospective and reflective discussion on the underlying context and also barriers. And the second report is on balancing excellence-driven research and transdisciplinary research and public engagement. And we build from our findings from the first objective and try to reflect in a higher level, let's say, on how these existing experiences contribute to the debate on open science and also democratization of science. How do we see the future roles of the European universities and some recommendations. So how we collect our data, we did the research in 5 universities in 5 European countries, the partners of Torch, and we focus on 31 good practices on public engagement and transdisciplinary science, and they are very diverse in terms of level, but also type of societal stakeholders that are engaged. We conducted 66 semi-structured interviews and also 6 online questionnaires and more than 11 focus group discussions with experts, but also with actors, including the academic and extra academic actors involved in different type of initiatives. And from this finding, we analyze the data qualitatively, and we are now trying to finalize the reports parallelly, the report 1 and 2. And hope to submit the final reports by the end of March. And I believe that these reports will be made public, so then you can also see the results and findings from our research. The first results that we wanted to show to you is in terms of structure and policies. It seems like for public engagement and transdisciplinary science, it is very related to the open science policy that has been actually taken by different universities. And it includes different elements, public engagement, of course, and rewards and recognition, but also open education and also fair data sharing. And most of the university already highlighted the importance of public engagement and transdisciplinary science, at least in one of the focus elements, either in the strategic plan, but also different units and centers, research project within the university. And we also identify the incentives and disincentives of doing public engagement at different levels. There are lists of them, of course, but I will try to just highlight some of the striking or interesting one. For the individual level, it is clear that public engagement and transdisciplinary science is still driven by individual themselves as a moral obligation, but also in terms of helping them to validate their individual or team scientific research. In terms of challenges, I think it's very clear that there is still lack of possibility of rewarding these public engagement activities with their career. Therefore, we found out that a rewards and recognition system is very important in supporting individuals. In terms of university level, there are a lot of different structures, supportive structure and policies, like I mentioned before on open science, rewards and recognition. And also the strength is that there are diverse type of initiatives, not only taken by the central level of the university, but also at the bottom-up level, at the department, faculties, and interfaculties institute. However, the challenges here is that this complexity also make it difficult to harmonize the vision of the university and determine the way forward to support public engagement and transdisciplinary science. In terms of societal stakeholders, interesting finding in terms of incentives is that many of the societal stakeholders show interest in having more opportunities for lifelong learning with the academic actors, also learning with students. And they receive benefits from access to scientific information that can actually give them a higher quality of services. For these incentives, the aspect of inclusiveness and also diversity is pinpointed as one of the challenging aspects. For example, by involving different layers of society, marginalized community, sometimes it brings conflict to the partnership and therefore avoided by many university actors. In terms of systemic level, it is very clear that at least at European level, there are already existing supported structure and mechanism, funding as well through Horizon Europe, but also other type of fundings that support citizen science and public engagement. And some countries at the national level, this already exists as well. However, the disincentives here is about competition and also missing standard for evaluation to assess the quality of transdisciplinary research and public engagement. So what is actually success initiatives? This is something that's still being questioned. So from this finding, our reflections in terms of open science, it is very clear that open science help to bridge science with society, and public engagement and transdisciplinary science is also two of the core elements. And it is very important also in terms of bridging science with underprivileged society or marginalized communities. And in terms of reflection on democratization of science, I think this is very, very interesting to see that not many universities actually agree with the term. So what do we mean with democratization of science? It means that we provide spaces and also power to community to influence the research agenda, or is it actually means opening up access of science to community? And I think more reflection on this would be very much helpful in our next session. In terms of European university role, university carry an important role in further contributing to democratic society and sustainability. But in the future, we see that European university can take more role as a testbed for innovation, like what the Torch and also CHARM-EU and other university alliance have been doing. And it's very important that the university also take a clear lobbying role to actually try to change the system and support more public engagement and transdisciplinary science. And the most important thing is also, again, back to the standardized evaluation, is how we can, as a university, can track the progress of our initiatives. But again, the question is, what is successful public engagement on transdisciplinary science? Some recommendation at the individual level, capacity seems very important to be increased, and the support at the team level is also very important to be increased. At the university level, we see that it is important to mainstream public engagement at different level of the university, at the central level, but also trying to flourish the bottom-up initiatives as well. And university can open more effective spaces for learning and dialogue to provide enabling environment, rewards and recognition system, but also focusing more on how we can involve more marginalized and disadvantaged community. At the national level, to improve the vision of science-society interaction, but also diversify different type of funding. It seems like there are already at least one or two mechanisms, but it is important to give spaces for different type of engagement. And try to also establish a network or forum, build an inventory to inform scientists about what is existing infrastructure and support, develop communication and cooperation, and to create national barometer to measure the impact of science for public policy. And at the regional level, at the EU level, we see that there should be more effort to embrace the autonomy and responsibility, especially of the university, to drive the open science agenda and include citizen engagement in their agenda, and to take an active role as well in the process of accumulation of knowledge. I mean, we have different alliances. I think it is very important to accumulate the knowledge from different alliances and make sure that we are going to the same direction and build up on each other work. And finally, to continue developing funding mechanism different targets of activities to engage society and in science, and also to solve societal problems. So yeah, that's the kind of summary of what we have been doing for the past year. That's a lot, of course, but some of the discussion points that would be, I think, useful, but of course, maybe you have any more points to add. First is, what are the key success factors and barriers for public engagement and transdisciplinary science based on your experience and expertise, and how far actually do we want to go as university in opening science to society? And again, the concept of democratization of science here may be important to raise. Are there actually boundaries to open science, and if so, which ones? And how can we realize open science in an inclusive and democratic way while leaving no one behind? And finally, how can we strike a balance between excellence-driven and challenge-driven research? Right, so that's the last slide that I can present to you. So I will give the floor back to Marianneke. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anissa. That was a great overview. Are there any clarifying questions? And any discussion questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as well, so we can take them up at the end of this session when we enter into a discussion. And the discussion points that Anissa showed, we can get back to them in the Q&A in the discussion again. So thanks, Anissa. So let's go to the next speaker, Truls Jacobsen.
Thank you, Marianneke, but now the share button disappeared. They came back again. Yeah, thank you. So, there we go. You should see this. Yes?
Yes.
So my name is Truls, in Danish, even in Norway, Truls Jacobsen. So I'm Director for Innovation and Social Engagement at the University of Stavanger. And so I'm going to present you the results, or let's say the current results of a project that we have within our ECAU community. So ECAU, there we go. ECAU is an alliance, in fact, who already existed back from '97, and the alliance was called European Consortium of Innovative Universities, because we all had, let's say, a strong point of being very, let's say, having a good relation integrated with our surroundings as a regional university. Some of us started as, let's say, change 30, 40, 50 years back as a change in our regions because the industry changed. For instance, the textile industry disappeared, so they had to find new ways of integrating with their surroundings. From our point of view in Stavanger, it was oil and gas who came. And then there was nothing 50 years before that, and before the fish was there. So this is how this university is so strongly integrated with each of the regions. So the opportunity came with this alliance, University Alliance, who came, and then in 2019, we are probably the largest group, I think, because we are 12 universities applying for this, and in the call it was written 6 to 7. So we're having some people in Brussels making very good lobbying, so we were able to apply, and we were successful, so that's very nice. For the Erasmus project, and then there was this specific call in SWAF call, which was related to all the alliances. And then we got this SMARTER project, which I'm going to talk a little more about. So what is SMARTER? Well, first of all, I mean, here you see briefly, I mean, we are widely represented across Europe. And since these are the partners in SMARTER, but in the meantime, also Łódź University in Poland has joined us recently. So, SMART stands for ECU University Research Institute for Smart European Regions. It's easier to say SMARTER. So what we're doing there, we have a focus on research and innovation, and we have agreed to address challenges related to the FN Goal 11, Smart Cities and Resilient City. And prior to that, before this application came in SMARTER, we already developed a roadmap for how to work together related to this. This you can find on our webpage, ecu.org. So already there, we were quite well prepared to continue to work with this challenge. And then, of course, when we work with how we work with our surroundings, so citizen science, open science, and so forth was, of course, very part of the daily agenda. So we wanted to establish what we called a virtual research institute, right? Which then focused on these 4 topics mainly. So it's to enhance the research collaborations, is to work with our structures in common. You have to remember we are 12 different localities or geographical localities across Europe, and even take the Monterrey in Mexico is also associated partner. So this gives some interesting challenges. We want to, in this project, to work also with incentives. So I'll come back briefly with one of them, but the other one is that within the research, we're having seed funds to make, let's say, younger research collaborate across the universities on different topics. And then we have PhD training programs and so forth that we are developing currently now. And there is incentive. That means there is money behind it. And then the final one, which is the one I'll talk more about, to empower the public engagement. So we have 2 work packages in SMARTER related to this. We have a work package directly on what we call public engagement, and then another one on citizen science. So the public engagement part, it is, we're having 3, it's very instrumental, but this is the EU project as it is. So we're having these 3 tasks. So first, and that was quite interesting to hear the presentation from Anissa, because it's the same thing we've been working with, so we definitely have to do something there afterwards. But the first one is to a review of the current practice and how we worked, how each of the universities are working with this. I'll show some slides related to that afterwards. And then currently we will develop a guideline to how to work with this. And in parallel, we are now establishing a community of practice at each of our universities to involve 1 or 2 persons, preferably from academic background, how they work with it, and then to train and learn from each other. So again, across the whole alliance. So first of all, I think we also have maybe in the discussion session afterwards, not to use too much time on it, but still, what is public engagement? And I think we will probably, like when we talk about innovation, we can have long talks and never agree exactly on what it is. But public engagement, we use the Horizon 2020 definition, as you can see here. So participatory multi-actor dialogues, an exchange to foster mutual understanding, co-create research and innovation outcome, and provide input to policy agenda. What's not in there? Quite a lot. So we also had a dialogue then how to define the different actors group. And firstly, we wanted maybe not to take everything, because all of our ECU universities were very much engaged with the industries around us. But we finally end up with taking all the actors as we see them. So we define them in 4 categories: the public actors, I mean, local authorities, public health providers, national authorities. Then we have what civil society, typically I mentioned as NGOs, but interest organizations, branch organizations. Then the industry actors, of course, the SMEs, industries, big, small ones. And then there's always this category, the rest, so others. And in here, for instance, we have museums, we have, of course, citizen science approach and all that. So these were, let's say, the categories when we went out with these questionnaires. And so we made 2 things. We have to remember we didn't have so much. We didn't have so much time, so we had a little less than a year to do all this. We made questionnaires, surveys with 44 questions, and we had to all the universities 74 responses, and there were multiple choice possible. That's why it's adding up to more than 72 in these 74 in these responses. And then based on that, each university organized workshops to, let's say, reflect on their own responses and to work further on the other responses they also got. And you see, when you see the question about what kind of collaborators, let's say, the collaboration they had, it was quite well distributed, a little overweight, of course, in public and industry sector, which was quite expected. So what kind of structure are they working? What kind of ways are they working with the actors? Membership, contracts, formalized collaborations. The larger one is projects. That is not unhabitual for universities to have a lot of projects. And then MOUs. So these are different ways, and the colors are reflecting what kind of actors they're working with. Another thing is what kind of method were they using? How did they interact? So it could be teaching, education. The projects are there again, living labs, or workshops, or consultations. So again, we have different results there. And then we came to something which is quite similar to what Anissa showed. Enablers and barriers, we call them. I think you had another word of saying it, but disincentives or incentives. But you can call it by many names, but the point is that there are these ways of doing things which facilitates, which enables communication, incentives. If there is incentives, always good, facilitation. And of course, the bigger one is the meeting place, all the different structures that we engage with our surroundings. And barriers, always a lot of barriers for academics. So you see some of them. And again, as I refer to what Anissa showed, there are these barriers. Academics live in a different world than their surroundings, the infrastructure, lack of supports. There are many topics. These are very briefly explained. Of course, there is a report coming out, and which then, sorry, I'll just mention also the other thing is that we having the other work package with the citizen science. There's been a lot of activity there. It started up with, they have developed now a web page internal in the ECU. It's not available still for the grand public, but it will come. And that is how to collaborate and build up projects which are with our citizens. So this will be open for the whole ECU community, and they can put in projects across the different, their surroundings. So that's going to be very interesting. There is also funding in here. So we're going to launch now 2 pilot projects. And the themes are more or less defined now. This has been occurring here in January, February. So 2 larger pilot projects will be launched at ECU level in this smarter project with 2 different thematics. I cannot say exactly what thematics is because it's still under finalization, but this is going to be quite interesting. And then also here, there will be recommendation and guidelines for development of citizen science projects. So finally, the next step, what's going to come out of this? The Smarter project has still 1.5 years to go. It's 1.5 years in the road. It's a 3-year project. So citizen science is definitely a big pillar in the things we are doing now. But little less maybe seen is this, that we will develop different guidelines and recommendations for how to do this public engagement, both on the public engagement at large and then citizen science especially. So I think my time is running out, so thank you for that. Should have been written thanks here, but okay.
Thank you so much, Truls.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any questions from the audience?
I do have a question, Marianneke.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering about the differences between how you see public engagement and citizen science. It seems like it's different work packages, but how do you then integrate the results of these two reports?
Let's say that this is organized at the whole Smarter project is organized at ECU level. So we have regular contacts between those two work packages, but also in our questionnaire, in fact, there were questions related to citizen science, and the responses of those went then to the other work package. But those two work packages are closely connected, so we do collaborate.
Does that answer your question, Anissa?
Yeah, I guess it comes from the definition again, like how do you see public engagement and what's the difference with citizen science and how they can link with each other. But yeah, it's always very difficult because yeah, sometimes you cannot identify the border, let's say. Maybe you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are three main things here. We are talking about public engagement, which was a little the core of the, let's say, the topic here. And then we're having then citizen science, which is part of the public engagement. And then, but you are mentioning a lot of open science, which in my mind is slightly different. So that's more related to academic performance and how they come out with, but let's keep that for the discussion.
Let's do that, yes. If there's no more questions, then let's go.
I'll keep it for the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah? Or do you want to chip in now, Kirsten?
I don't know how we are time-wise, but I'm curious to learn more. You mentioned that you have also seed funding available within the Smarter project, and so for different topics, and also then for this new platforms. So I was wondering, does this come from the European money, or is this money from the universities themselves?
Very good question. It's a mixture. It's mainly from the Smarter project. So the budget was allocated in the writing part of it, the proposal, and it's a substantial part. It's approximately half of the budget who is going for these two things. One is the Smarter Academy, I mean the seed project, the research project, and the other part is related to the citizen science pilots. But the universities also have, let's say, an in-kind in both of these things.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. See, Torch is younger as a project, and I think for us it's also a very important question to see how we can roll out more and have a broader base within our universities and become more known. Yeah, and of course this is one way to do it, and but then the question arises how to finance it.
Yeah, and it also relates to the question, actually, the sort of dilemma that Anissa also raised in terms of how, so there's, at our university, for example, there's a lot of seed money as well, but then there's a lot of sort of different bottom-up initiatives and mushrooming. So at some point you might want to have some coordination in a way, but let's leave that to the discussion. That would be also interesting to hear how different universities and maybe alliances are dealing with this. So let's move on to the next speaker, Thomas Berkman, Associate Professor. The floor is yours. And
okay. Thank you, Marianneke, very much. So yes, I think very much what I will say resonates with what we have talked about. But let's start from the beginning. I represent Transform for Europe consortium and project. consortium is a part of a general European University Consortium initiative and consists of Saarland University in Germany, University of Alicante in Spain, Estonian Academy of Arts in Estonia, University of Silesia in Katowice, Poland, Sofia University St. Clement Orchidski in Bulgaria, University of Trieste in Italy, and my university, Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania, which I represent. So, but the project Transform for European Research and Innovation is a separate research activity inside the consortium. It has separate financing and tasks and goals, but partners are the same, but we are really very new or fresh, so to say, especially in today's context. So our experience will be very, how to say, new and maybe limited from what I've already had. In this project, my university is responsible for work package 4, which is called Science for All, and I am responsible for public engagement, and we add in research and innovation and abbreviated as PERI task, and we also have 2 other tasks, which is science communication, a separate task, and open science, a separate task. So it shows that we try to analyze, research those 3 fields, PERI, science communication, and open science as separate, although of course very much related fields and tasks. So that is a challenge in itself, especially having in mind this conceptual unclarities, what you already mentioned, but so we try to do it this way, and for now we have chosen, so to say, to develop, so to say, in relationship to PERI, this more narrow approach, and actually we consider 2 terms, public engagement in research and innovation and citizen science, as being close terms, but not identical. And I will return to that later when I will speak about challenges. So we are still at the initial stages in the project. We still gather information, analyze status quo of respective fields. Accordingly, for now, I can account for the research made in relation to my country, Lithuania, what is the situation and challenges to public engagement in research and innovation, and mostly to citizen science in my country. Of course, that may resonate with what happens in this field in other countries, and some of my observations will be of general nature. So at last, from the perspective of my country, we divided all public engagement in the research and innovation related activities into 2 general types, PERI-direct and PERI-reflective activities. The former are those activities where public is directly engaged in research and innovation. The latter are activities related to the reflection on PERI situation in different contexts. For example, this could be projects exactly devoted for developing ways, tools, models to improve general PERI situation, to encourage or incentivize PERI activities in the country, region, and so on. So with respect to the latter type of activities, we have rather good situation in Lithuania as of today. Universities participate in several important projects in this respect, especially 2 universities active. It is Kaunas Technology University and our university. And I noticed in Troil's slide that Kaunas Technology University is also participating in your initiative. But this university actually participates in several projects. For example, citizen sciences, innovative form of citizen participation in creating welfare society, one project. Another in which they participate is Horizon 2020 You Count project, which develops methods, tools to incentivize young people or youth to participate in citizen science more narrowly or broadly public engagement in research and innovation activities. Also, they participate in another Horizon 2020 project support for sustainable institutional changes to promote citizen science in the field of science and technologies. Our university, besides Transform for Europe project, also started to participate just recently. Our library in the project University Libraries, strengthening the academia society connection through citizen science in the Baltics. So I think 4 universities of Baltic states made such a project. And just recently, just a few months ago, all this culminated in the first book on citizen science ever published in Lithuania. However, the situation with those direct activities, to say diplomatically, could be better in Lithuania. Definitely they exist, but still are relatively rare or scarce, as it was concluded in one of the projects which I mentioned. The idea of citizen science as innovative form of citizens' inclusion is widely used abroad. However, in Lithuania, inclusion of citizens into research activities is only in the initial stage. Or another conclusion, Lithuania has huge potential for citizen science. However, its realization in practice is weak. Essentially, we can count all those direct citizen science activities in Lithuania on 10 fingers of our hands. What dominates it is the field of course, biology and biological diversity. We have such activities as species rally, bird watching rally, National Moth Week, initiative looking for cowslips, or Lithuanian iNaturalist Society in Facebook. Also, our university in 2016 implemented one project having the aim to collect information about moss living beings. Other fields are environment studies, ecology, health. Our university from 2019 is a partner in the project Citizen Science for Urban Environment and Health. And the aim of this project is to develop an effective citizen science model and respective toolkit in the field of environmental epidemiology. And there is certain participation of Lithuanian International Directory Initiative Drinkable Rivers devoted to the research of the quality of water and ecology. But that is basically all activities. So what are other challenges besides relevant scarcity of those direct activities? Of course, one of them is keeping people involved, motivated and engaged. As usually with such activities, there is a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, but then later all that may change. Also, in today's perspective, that should be analyzed together with the impact of COVID epidemic. Looking at concrete cases, for example, Species Rally makes the events regularly every year starting from 2012, but it appears that in 2020 they made a pause, but then continued in 2021 and so on. But for example, National Moth Week initiative appears to be inactive from 2017. Another challenge is that it all is still very much concentrated around certain fields of science, and most of them are considered to be the part of so-called natural or hard sciences. And I think this is also related to this conceptual environment, which is still very much unclear. We have, as already mentioned, few concepts circulating in the respective field as citizen science, citizen engagement, public engagement in research and innovation. But I don't know, in our project, we think that this very concept, public engagement in research and innovation, is really a very good concept if you want to be the most inclusive and most corresponding to the classical scope of university or academia, because term public presupposes the most inclusive approach to the engagement in research and innovation, covering all people living in one or another state, region, without regard to their citizen status. In generally, this concept citizen is rather narrow. Also, the term science is at least occasionally still used to denote specifically natural or related fields of sciences, this way being narrower one than the term research. Thus, the selection of the latter should leave no hesitation that the scope of analysis here runs across all scientific research disciplines, from natural sciences to arts and humanities. And in certain countries, what we managed to learn, citizen science and public engagement are considered different concepts exactly in that respect. But that is my final remark. Then the thing about this broader coverage, stepping into, for example, I don't know, arts, humanities, certain social sciences with citizen science or public engagement in research and innovation, I don't know, that may look much more challenging to think about the forms of activities and incentives. Thus, for me, I don't know, all experiences in that respect would be very interesting. For example, doing citizen science in history, art, or psychology. As I'm a legal scholar, how this could be applied, for example, to legal science, what activities could be implemented here. We could think, for example, about, I don't know, collecting certain information about court activities, jurisprudence, or judges, actual behavior, especially if we accept notion of legal realism, that the law is what courts do and want to test it. But one thing is to go to nature and to observe birds, or to put a smart wristband on your hand, which what in one case is rather pleasurable, in another rather simple thing to do. But to incentivize public or citizens to go to courts to observe the public proceedings is not maybe that attractive and simple. It requires knowledge, it requires time, and so on. So biology, environment, ecology, health, astronomy, these are really clear known fields where citizen science or public engagement in this narrower sense is implemented. But for me, just to finish with the question, would be really interesting to hear experiences about your institutions, your countries, doing citizen science in those other not so clear, obvious, or maybe more exotic fields. That would be really interesting to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was really interesting, and also quite related to some of the findings that we have with regard to what your last point, that a lot is focused on natural or sort of hard science. We also had this discussion of, well, what does open science mean? Often it has this connotation of being focused on natural science. But also what you said earlier about, like, there's lots of enthusiasm and public engagement at the start, but how do you sort of keep people engaged there? I see a lot of interesting points for discussion there. Are there any questions for Thomas? If not, then Tools, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, sorry. He needs to leave at 2:30. So are there any questions for him, or do you want to add anything, Tools, on what has been discussed so far?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting forum to maybe pursue this a little. I was just thinking, in fact, with the work we are doing now, it could be quite interesting to having more closer dialogue with what's going on in Torch. I mean, this is because we're doing the same thing. So I mean, we have 12 universities. You had 6 or something like that, but So, I mean, the way of collaborating here will be quite similar. The way of maybe addressing the question will be quite similar. So that's something maybe, I know that Olga is from ECU, the central part in Brussels is also listening here. So maybe she can pick up something afterwards to continue that. The other one thing, I'm very sorry, Kate, but I'll have to leave in the middle of your presentation. But I want to mention that Dublin City University, in fact, has something very much in front because they have a whole department, I think, for social engagement, or let's say public engagement. I don't know exactly the title, with Ronnie Monk as the leader there, and he has a huge, vast experience within these topics there. So very strong assets, and I think always in typical people from England, Ireland, and so forth, they typically have a very strong experience with these kind of things because they also work with the social engagement. So that's also an aspect we haven't discussed, but which is also important. So on this, I'll listen as far as I can, but I have a big ECU meeting here at 14:30 where we have to integrate 2 different projects and how we work with innovation hubs. So how we make a structure for this collaboration with our surrounding and all the actors we mentioned. So this is in another project we also have, but which is part of this. How do we organize this in a systematic way, not just on the individual research? Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you very much until now, and suddenly I'll just leave. So Kate, I'll follow as much as I can.
Thank you so much.
Grant, yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, well, we're going to think about this in terms of our presentation, looking at it structurally and trying to think about systemic change outside of university and kind of bottom up, top down, starting with our government. So, and working its way down to the student, opening the doors of a university to retirement when they're getting their golf clubs, and how we embed it in the entire life cycle or the experience of university life. So if I could share my slides, I'll fly through them. I can, fantastic. So just to make a quick nod to Sarah Bowman, my colleague, who I know is a member of this consortium and has been a close associate and pal in how we try to change hearts, minds, systems at not only at an Irish level, but also trying to tip away at the perma-ice within the European Commission level over the last 8 years. So my presentation is a quick 101 on engaged research is the language we use, and innovation for societal impact in Ireland, but of course that bleeds into our work at a European level. Very briefly, we kicked this journey off in 2015 when we had each president of the universities in Ireland and the Institutes of Technology sign a 10-point charter that committed to engaged research and innovation and community engaged teaching and learning through their institutional strategies and practice on the ground. And we built this charter with and for the sector and for the country. We built it around then a set of key performance indicators on how we do that across research, innovation, teaching and learning. So we operate in an ecosystem with semi-offices across, so we only have 8 universities in Ireland, okay? So within each of these institutions, we want to build the infrastructure. And I think one point we're missing earlier is the need to kind of recalibrate or reorganize research and innovation departments to position this and get lead individuals working for engaged research across the core areas to make real societal on the ground impact. So we're working in Ireland across a number of key policy. This is the core policy, environment and ecosystem we are working with to provide evidence of impact. So we have a Department of Higher Education in Ireland, Higher Education Research Innovation, which is a really lucky spot to be in because we work directly with policymakers in government to help them draft strategy, help inform the criteria of funding agencies, help them embed this in data collection for promotion criteria of staff. And of course we have Horizon Europe, where the challenges are all about engagement. Ranking tools, for better or worse, are all about society engagement for impact. We know they're toxic, but they exist. And then so on, our various funding calls and research and innovation strategy, which very clearly now will position engaged research and innovation for impact which is due to be launched in spring this year. So we've been working on this, as I mentioned, since 2016 at an all-island level, or at a sectoral level, but interdepartment level also across the various related departments. So expenditure, public reform, enterprise, trade, research, innovation, community, rural development, etc. So we've been building the evidence base, so carrying out evidence reviews, consulted with over 300 people to form a framework on how to do engaged research, a framework on how to better evidence the impact of research and innovation, okay? And we always do, what we do is we try to work as much as bringing people to the table to work with us. So we're avoiding duplication of effort. We have one framework for the country. We have one framework to do how to do it and how to implement it. We are working with our main funding agencies. We launched a report, and from that report developed a capacity building program, which we've had in play now since 2018. And it was built out with our funding agencies, with Horizon 2020 Ireland at the time. And we trained the European national contact points, our members of the Science Foundation Ireland centres, and various researchers across the system. So that we really tapping away at this now for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And what we call, this is an important point. So our big challenge was to create frameworks and terminology that worked for everybody. So engaged research is a terminology that we have bought buy-in for, and it covers public-patient involvement, responsible research innovation, co-creation, transdisciplinary research, citizen science, engagement for public good in working with industry. So there's the definition. Wide range of research, rigorous research approaches and methods, the share common interest in collaboration with partners rather than for them. And we talk about our partners as public policy makers, citizens on the ground, those who are not citizens, refugee asylum seekers, for example, industry partners and others. Quadruple helix, just to remind ourselves, this is a slide we use frequently on who we are talking about, those when we're talking about partnerships for impact. So along with Sarah Bowman, as I mentioned earlier, we set about building these tools, using the evidence that's out there to build unique implementable tools for our researchers across the ecosystem in Ireland, our researchers and research users. So this framework is all about the how-to, and it's a spiral diagram that each point across the research cycle, there's a point that you can work with research users. So generating your research question, designing and planning your research project, putting in proposals. What's wonderful now is this is all across the European challenge-based funding calls. You can't put in a proposal without working with the research end users, which is a real coup. Project out, kickoff, data collection, all the science, citizen science piece, data analysis, then knowledge production and dissemination, knowledge transfer and impact assessment. All across these points in the research cycle, you can work with the research end users to increase the likelihood that you are making impact on the ground with patients, with policymakers, with farmers trying to create zero emission farms, etc. And these are the types of activities across that cycle as well. Everything from collaborating, consulting, informing and inspiring. And that goes from real hardcore co-produced, co-created research to using social media podcasts to disseminate. So we built out, in addition to our framework on how to do engaged research, we have a framework on how to better plan for societal impact with your policymakers, your farmers, your industry partners, and it covers 8 core key areas. But we're, again, like the framework, we are also redrafting these based on the latest frameworks in the system, latest research out there. I cannot wait to get my hands on some of the research coming out of this, particularly Anissa. Your work is fascinating. It's going to be really relevant to what we do going forward here. So likewise, we're always delighted to share our information. So we're building out this impact categories, these impact categories now. And what these really are tools for our researchers on how they can better plan and name the impacts, the outcomes and the impacts that they want to see on the ground while preparing with the research users their proposals. So our new framework is going to include all of these very relevant and newer framework potential metrics and indicators of action for impact. So the DORA framework, our UN SDGs, our public service reform agenda, key indicators and trends across that. New knowledge transfer metrics across the EU that have been informed by Alison Campbell, our Director for Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and across the horizon, Europe's new framework for impact, including economic, societal, and scientific publication, which we like to call knowledge production. And of course, these are all going to be mapped onto the UN SDGs, and how we are working to implement the UN SDGs through research and innovation through SDG 17, particularly, which is partnerships for on-the-ground change. And I don't think you can do any of SDG 1 to 16 without SDG 17, which is partnerships, which is what all of your work is about. And of course, we have this European monitoring tool, which Ireland always falls kind of slap bang in the middle of. But this is what the European Commission intends to use to monitor and assess how we are working to implement the UN SDGs through research and innovation. So we know that our CSO, the Central Statistic Office in Ireland, gathers this data to report back on this monitoring instrument. So this is not a bad place to start in terms of thinking about how your research can, down the line, impact the implementation of the UN SDGs and connecting to the EU Commission's challenge-based funding initiative. As I mentioned, in Ireland, we have this new metrics, this new set of data for how we think about knowledge transfer metrics. This is the classic old theory of change logic model that we train our researchers and innovators on. Very basic stuff here. How we work with our farmers, how we work with industry partners, how we work with patients to understand a situation, the societal challenge. And then we work backwards from impact. What is the impact you want to see on the ground? What are those subjective ideas you want to see that's changed? And then work back on what are the outcomes that need to be achieved, the quantitative outcomes, outputs and impacts. And all of this is underpinned by excellent science and monitored and evaluated through the course of the project to make sure that it is formatively working as you would hope it, changing it as you go to tweak the project potential milestones and deliverables to make sure you're delivering impact. Brilliantly, again, I was delighted to see that capacity, building human capacity, is incorporated into the conversation here. And this is the first thing our government is funding us to do, to build human capacity for this in this space. So along with our partners, we have taken our existing training that we've delivered now to close to maybe, Sarah, 800, 900 staff, and we want to rapidly scale that across the sector in Ireland, across the system in Ireland. So we're working with the government, the department agency for further higher education, our technological universities, Horizon Europe Ireland, Science Foundation Ireland, Irish Research Council, the Health Research Board, all of our funding agencies to build capacity, but also building this into their funding calls. In Ireland, it's interesting, the funding calls all have this in there anyway, engagement for impact. The policy is there pretty much, but it's trying to change the systems at an institutional level to reward, to acknowledge, to promote, to gather the correct data to indicate that this stuff is happening. So we're chipping away at that. So we have an advisory group for each of our projects, and we bring everybody onto the bus, all of the funding agencies, government departments, expert researchers, such as Sarah Bowman, who's in the audience. And specifically on this training program, Sarah is leading out on the development of content with expert colleagues and the implementation of the project in general. So we're very lucky to work with Sarah. Huge appetite and interest for this across Ireland. We had 300 plus sign up for a small launch the other day, and we were 400% oversubscribed for the training. Again, it really helps that this is kind of built bottom up, led by experts, but supported top down by government agency and university presidents and exec. Very briefly, our course, which we hope to run out across beyond Ireland into the future. It's a one-on-one on what engaged research is, how you can plan to deliver societal impact with your research users, methods, very specifically evidence for public policy that's really called out in the European Commission FP9. So how we better skill, upskill, train, build capacity on, with some really brilliant case studies in Ireland across since COVID, and emissions, waiting for emissions charges that you're influencing the European Union in that space. So we want to use these case studies of what works throughout the training to inspire and change practice. So it's an online 6-week course, 26 learner hours, peer-to-peer learning, and then really led by cases of what works. And we have a very similar thing for teaching and learning, because we see this as I mentioned at the start, we want to capture this. We want to get students, as soon as they put their bums on their seats in their university for their university experience, we want them to be exposed to engaged, community engaged learning. So we've developed an online course for this also, similar to what I've just mentioned for expert researchers. Similar, this is an early intervention approach to getting students working in engaged, unengaged projects to solving societal challenges through the curriculum, very similar to what Charm has done in Trinity. And then Sarah has also led out in that work or supported the thinking around it. And we launched that a number of, probably close to 8 months ago, with 370 people registered. And we're building these beautiful case studies on community engaged learning, addressing the UN SDGs through teaching and learning. And that's all on our website and available. There are video case studies and PDF case studies to inspire. And we showcase them at the International Talwar Network with Harvard Kennedy School of Public Policy, with the director there and our Director General for the Department of Further Higher Education Research Innovation in September. So really we look at this Ireland as an opportunity for global, bringing in students, international students into the country. This is what students want. And we need to kind of get 21st century, 22nd century ready. We have how-to guides on our website to support anybody. If you guys want to read a bit more, we're in the process of updating these for our training, but they are there and they're available. And we also have a kind of a changing hearts and minds piece as well, which is about policy briefings, short 2-page, 3-page policy briefings targeting our higher education institutional exec committees, one for senior civil servants in government across interdepartmental agencies, how we can work better with researchers to address societal challenges. And then the third is for policy for funding agencies, how they need to change, core criteria, weighting of applications, funding and societal partners throughout the research life cycle. So it's all work in progress. But the main point is, if you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So this is all about bringing hard work, but bringing all of the stakeholders to the table to change systems. And believe me, we have a long journey yet to go. But there's a big difference I can see in the last 2 years at a kind of a top-down kind of understanding of that this is not just about doing good things. This is about impact, societal impact, and justifying every cent that goes into research and innovation, that you have evidence that you're making a change on the ground. So we have a database if you want to sign up to it. Please follow us on Twitter or drop me an email on kate.morris@iua.ie. So I'll stop now. See, it's coming up to 22. It's a quick 101 on what's going on in Ireland at the moment.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a brilliant overview. Thanks. Any questions for Kate? Clarifying questions? If not, then I suggest we start the discussion. So I picked up a couple of very interesting discussion points, but I would like to invite the audience to ask their questions or to bring in their ideas, their views. Anyone who would like to share, just raise your hand or speak up, or put it in the chat, that's also fine. Kirsten, did you want to follow up on your earlier question?
Yeah, well, I could actually. Yeah, I think it was really interesting to hear from Tol. He had to leave early, so that in fact they use quite an amount of their budget to enable actually seed funding activities. And maybe that's also a good question for the other presenters. Is this something that you also do, or how is it organized?
Anyone wants to react on that?
Can I just add there? I think what's important for the European University Alliance's initiatives, is to work like it's the organized the cooperative approach is working under the Commission. But what's really important is that you're working with your local country-based or in your jurisdiction, your funding agencies, and to think about how you're changing things structurally, locally as well, in terms of call criteria, in terms of call weighting, in terms of opportunity to do engaged research, because I think it's a significant barrier. And it might only be little spits of seed funding. In Ireland, we have kind of like innovation voucher type through an Irish Research Council approach, where you might get 10,000-15,000 euros to start a partnership, which can then blossom into something more significant. Might be in a Science Foundation challenge later down the line, or an EU Commission consortium project. But I think it's important while working at a European level to focus your energies also within local, to come together and target and adapt maybe one briefing to focus in on your country or within your own jurisdiction funding agencies to change call criteria and for engaged research or for co-creation.
Anita?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks so much, Kate, for the presentation. I know it's the session for discussion, but I couldn't help myself to ask you, because it seems like it's a very good initiative with a lot of people and actors involved. But of course, the challenge is how to facilitate different interests of different institutions who are collaborating in Campus Engage. So what are the key success factors that you think makes Campus Engage become successful, let's say?
In a nutshell, 3. It's like trying to implement policy. I think there's a huge issue around policy implementation at all levels, but the 3 main factors: strong leadership, strong leadership, effective communication of what you're trying to do, and the third is expert professional people like you guys doing it. You know, the how-to bit is based on those 3 factors. It's implementation science. There's all sorts of publications written about it, for myself included, back in the day. But I think those effective leadership is so vital. So my bosses are the 8 presidents of the 8 universities of Ireland. You get buy-in at that level in a cooperative, supportive system. It's not always supportive, believe me. A lot of things are done in the shadows, and we'll risk it for a biscuit and see what happens. You know, but I mean, it's based within the Irish Universities Association. So something coming from the European Universities Association to support the European Alliance, Universities Alliance, I think will be quite effective in terms of this, specifically this area on societal engagement, societal impact, would be helpful as a kind of a lobby agency.
Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that also what we need certain more strategic approaches to that, especially from governing bodies. I don't know, at least in Lithuania, you know, there is not only that we do not have any strategy how to develop engaged research on citizen science. Those concepts are even not mentioned in our laws at all. I don't know, do you have in your countries any strategic documents at the level of regulation in relationship to public engagement at all? We do not have. So still universities are left alone, so to say, to work with that. And of course we have projects and European funding, but that's all. But what is the situation in your countries?
Certainly in Ireland, we lobby government to make sure that it's in the National Research and Innovation Strategy. In fact, 4 days ago, we met with the author of the strategy to say, you know, this is about European impact, you know, as members, grateful current situation, considered members of a European Union, how we are, you know, as citizens of Ireland or non-citizens of Ireland, how doing research and innovation, how is it impacting people on the ground? And that's through engaged research. And think of the kind of cost benefit of doing engaged research rather than other. So I think it's a very specific skill set as well, I'd argue. And that's why I think the how universities are actually the research and innovation and development infrastructures possibly not fit for purpose in some ways, that we need better research for societal impact leadership embedded in the institutional infrastructures. It's a kind of a realignment to catch up with policy and funding.
Yeah, and maybe I can add, it's quite on a different level, but in the Netherlands, the government organized a large process to develop a national science agenda, national research agenda, where the entire public was invited to ask their questions or say where do we need to do research. And this was quite a big process. So say the government stimulates this, and behind this is of course also the question, we give funding to the universities, so they also have to do something back for society and show their societal relevance. So that's also a bit what is behind this. So on the one hand, universities, they have to also keep proving their legitimacy. The other thing, of course, is economic contribution to the economic sector of universities. I mean, there's no discussion about that, but this is very relevant, of course, to innovativeness.
Yeah, and I think it's also a question of where do you sort of provide the guidance or the support. So there's, of course, at the higher level, there's funding available, and there's this sort of engagement with the citizens on which research questions should be asked. But at the same time, you also hear that public engagement and transdisciplinary science should be very sort of targeted. So the incentives are very clear at the regional, sometimes even the local level. I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts on that. It's also a question of who is responsible. We had that discussion in also our work package, where I think Sarah Baumann said, well, it's the university should be given leeway to engage with society, but they shouldn't necessarily be seen as the main ones responsible to drive this whole thing. It should come from all kinds of sides, I suppose. I mean, we could be drivers, I think, and also at the alliance level, but there's different levels where you can try to incentivize that, including at the government level. And then there was also the question, and I would be interested to hear your thoughts on this, how to keep actors engaged once you started, actually. So I think this was one of the questions that Thomas also raised in his talk. Maybe you want to add on to that, Thomas?
Well, I don't know. It's a relatively known problem, more related specifically to citizen science. But you know, I don't know. Well, it's a thought of problem. So what tools could be, what methods could be to still keep people engaged, you know, after they start certain activities. As I told at the beginning, there may be a lot of enthusiasm, but you know, probably people who do that, either scholars or just simple amateurs, so to say, so they could think more holistically about the activity from the very beginning, you know, and what are really the perspectives of such activity which they start. I don't know, certain collection of certain data, for example, and think about from the very beginning about exactly sustainability of the activity. But yeah, that's the known problem. I don't have very clear answer, because as I told, we just started to work on that. Just to add a little bit, from the very beginning, actually the main problem was exactly the conceptual one, and we are still a bit struggling with it, and that was also touched upon in our talks here, that we have like conceptual and a lot of conceptual unclarities. We have concepts, many concepts, now citizen science, science communication, open science, engaged research, and so on and so on. And what is exactly interrelationship between them, and what is actually the problem? The result is that it appears that we are working in Europe here on rather different conceptual frameworks, and how to solve this. So that's why I think we need certain, maybe, I don't know, something, top-down regulation, certain vocabulary. Not because, like European Association of Citizen Science, they tried to do that, but, they started, the first sentence from which they start concept, description of concept, that, citizen science is a broad concept and can be used in various circumstances. So how we can work with this and how we can be coherent in Europe working with that, the conceptual, I don't know, incoherence. So that's still, for me, I don't know, one of the problems, and how to solve it. I don't see any other possibility, but just to certain, we need the, so to say, leadership, which gives us vocabulary, and then we can do it. So I'm sorry that I deviated from your question, Marianeka, but for me it's also a problem.
Yeah, true. I recognize that issue of like leadership and having a sort of strong concept. At Utrecht University, for example, it's open science, where we have the vice rector really very much engaged in this issue. So we have this strongly reflected in this strategic plan of the university. And then it's also then sort of trickled down into the faculties, where there is like sort of champions working on this open science program. I see a hand from someone who hasn't spoken yet. Julia, do you want to chip in?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, thanks a lot for your very, very interesting presentations. My background is in a transdisciplinary project, so we've been working a lot with stakeholders as well, and there were a lot of aspects that I also found in the research that we've been doing. For instance, that the question of defining terms kept popping out throughout your presentations. I think that's really important. We also put a lot of emphasis on this in our project, spending like a whole year just defining terms and coming to common research questions. And from this perspective, I think it's important. Well, I guess it depends a little bit of which level you're looking at, but not only to have top-down certain terms, but also really include the stakeholders in these processes. So to make sure that we're on the same level and using terms in the same way. I think if you're already seeing so many differences across the scientific actors, then of course the gap to the practical stakeholders would be even bigger. And then another point that I found interesting was the question about keeping stakeholders engaged throughout the process. That's also something we struggled with, especially because there are often different timelines between scientific processes and stakeholder processes. And I think that's a lot about question of communication as well, to make this clear in the beginning. And so we dealt with having products that were commonly worked on with the stakeholders throughout the process. But maybe you can also reflect a little bit more on what your experiences were from this diversity of projects that you've been working with. What good tools can be to address these different timelines as well. So thanks again.
Yeah, this is exactly what we also found in the work package, where there's differences in timeline indeed for societal actors versus researchers. Anyone wants to react to that? I see Anissa, you raised your hand.
Yes, but actually well, it also relates to what Julia mentioned, but also earlier in terms of how to engage society in the longer term. I think indeed, I mean, in our work package, we also see and analyze good practices of citizen science project, especially from the natural science background. And it seems like the most important aspect is how to define the role of citizen in the research itself. Is it only about collecting the data or more than that? So again, it comes back to the concept, what do we mean by citizen science here? But I think what we found also, if societal stakeholder is clear and also the scientific actor is clear in terms of what are their goals and the benefits to both actors, to both scientists, but also societal stakeholders, that actually will increase the successfulness of the project and also the sustainability of the project. For example, if you have research on trying to collect photos or data from local community, the question is, what is the benefit for the local community who actually provide the data to you, right? And the problems of scaling up, for example, how can this type of project be scaled up? It has to also match with the interests of the local stakeholders, local government. So it's a very complex issue, but I would just like to mention that the end goal should be clear, and also the roles of each actors in all types of research, either citizen science or transdisciplinary science, however we want to call it, let's say.
Thanks, Anissa. Great point. We're nearly to the end, and there was one very good comment actually by Andrea on alumni networks that might have positive impact on public engagement. I see Kate raises her hand. Maybe you have some last points to share.
I have one point, and then I have a quick statement. So my point is about the terminology. And I said, I mean, we don't know if we have it right. These things always take time to properly evaluate them and understand. But what I find with changing hearts, changing cultures and attitudes, if you get into the, bless us, but this kind of academic navel gazing and getting overly complicating ourselves with definitions and terminology, they switch off. Shutters come down. Policymakers funding it, keep it broad and keep it kind of comprehensive. And then in the implementation of that, keep it authentic, co-created, and that's a huge effort. I know from doing it with through the years, it is a huge effort and it can't be undermined. The other thing is I have to leave, but I just want to make an important statement that the Irish universities members deplore the invasion of Ukraine and offer support to affected staff and students through our website, the IUA.ie. I think we're in such a luxurious position here to be talking amongst ourselves on these projects. So I have to leave, but I think people in need and wanting to get support from Irish universities, we have a website dedicated to this through IUA.ie. And so I will let you go, and I just really thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate to get the audience, and your work is fascinating and it's so important. And please keep in touch. If I can support you, if I can, and we can be of asset or support you in the work and going forward, we're here. And again,
thank you so much, Kate.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Adios.
That's great. Thank you. If you can share the website in the chat, that would be great. And
No
people
problem,
can
do it right
look
away.
it up. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, I would like to close the session. Thank you so much for participating, especially to the speakers and to the audience as well. Thanks, and I'm sure we will continue this conversation. I picked up a lot of ideas also for the new proposal for the European University Alliance, so I'm happy with this discussion.
Thank you for this wonderful initiative very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.